Just out of curiosity in the group, how many people here are actually app developers, just by show of hands? That's good. We got some real builders here. How many people are in the dark side of venture capital or investing, just to get a sense? Okay, so all of us are the ones trying to chase the other people that raised their hands a moment ago. Well, cool. Look, I'm really honored to be here. I mean, I think let's give it up for the ENIAC team. I mean, these do an incredible job in these conferences. And we're really fortunate as a venture capital firm to be partnered with them. We work together on a lot of different deals and projects, and many times the conversations about things that we don't invest in are as valuable as the ones as we do. And so we're really proud to be a small part of the ENIAC ecosystem, and really excited hopefully to meet many of you in the crowd here. Okay, so there were background, I think, to this conversation. I'm really honored to be up here with Jeff, the founder and CEO of Neumob. Is that over the past 10 years, we all have seen incredible innovation on the front end of mobile. When you think about ride sharing, you think about mobile commerce, you think about all the delivery services, some of which will still be in business in 5 years. You think about all those different incredible companies on the front end. What's amazing is that a lot of the money-making opportunity, we believe, as well as the things and the problems that have not been solved, still relate to the mobile infrastructure. It's hard to be in the Bay Area or New York, where many of you probably live, and how often your cell phone still drops. It doesn't actually have good quality of service. It is amazing how these beautifully sculpted user experience applications half the time have terrible latency and do not function. And that lack of fixing the basics in mobile, I think, is one of the great new areas of investment opportunity. And that's why Nihal and myself, obviously, were fortunate and lucky to work with Jeff. So Jeff, excited to be here with you. Let me start with a basic question, if I could. You have had the opportunity to work around the CDN space for over a decade. Talk a little bit about your background, and if I could sort of put a point to this question, why isn't it that a lot of the incumbents that you worked with, why hasn't the problem yet been solved? And why is there still an opportunity for a startup like Neumob to go after this mobile app and web acceleration space?
Thanks. Really honored to be here, everyone. So to frame that up, kind of based on let me back into that question. So this morning, Jason talked about the iPhone being, the point where everything changed, right? So in terms of definition, let's talk. Before iPhone is BC, afterwards it's kind of AD, right? And so, quite honestly, and Rich, I've kind of been I've worked for 4 carriers: Nextel, Sprint, Tata, KDDI. So I've been in the bowels of BC for a really long time, as well as I was an early employee of Akamai. I actually worked for 3 CDNs, Akamai, BitGravity, which is a video CDN player, and then most recently with CD Networks. So all of us in the BC world have been focusing on making websites faster, internet, IT, working with legacy carriers. I will say that the problem in BC land, compared to the problem with AD, is fundamentally different. Okay, so let me to answer your question specifically. Accelerating websites, the Akamais of the world have been doing that for 16 years. They do a phenomenal job. If you want to make your website faster, you go to someone like Akamai or a Cloudflare or someone to that effect, and they'll do what needs to be done. The technology there is really fat centralized servers and then a very thin browser layer. Okay, so everything is about the browser. Okay, so along the time, people try to use fatter clients like JavaScript or Flash, came and went. But fundamentally, the world over there was really smart server and really dumb thin client, right? Fast forward to AD, and we have these devices like Android and iOS, and that is not a thin little sliver of client anymore, right? Apps fundamentally changed the fact that you have a mini cloud, in your pocket, and so when you frame it in that respect, when you flip it on its head and say, hey, make my mobile device the center of the entire architecture, and then come up with the architecture and processes and technology to deliver properly with the mobile device at the center of the world, all the algorithms change. And so the answer to your question is, it's fundamentally a different problem. So I know, like, again, having been in the space for a really long time, the space that we work in, mobile infrastructure, it's kind of like plumbing. It's not sexy, it's not cool, it's not the UI, UX, but there is a massive shift going on in mobile infrastructure that is trailing what's happening on the client side.
So Jeff, help us understand, why is the problem a big deal now, maybe when it wasn't a couple years ago? And give us some sense of dimensionalizing the problem, like in what geographies and what locations, what types of applications, if you can say, don't do a good job, and help us understand the problem a bit.
Great. So we launched, and I'll answer that by giving you some data. We launched a consumer app earlier this year. So even though we're not a B2C company, we're a B2B company. We go out, as Rich mentioned, and Nahal mentioned, we go out to app developers, they bake in our SDK.
If you have an Android phone, download now, please.
So Android, Neumob,
It'll make your apps faster.
Download the app. It's not our core revenue generating engine, but we launched it about 9 months to a year ago. And the purpose of this was to analyze mobile traffic, to figure out what's going on out there, who's hosted with who, how are apps performing. So go download an Android. iOS is coming. We got permission from Apple to use some of their proprietary proxy API, so we're working on that now, and hopefully we'll come out with that by the end of the year. So the answer to that is, even within a locale like this, San Francisco or New York, we can make things about 40% faster over 4G LTE, things like that. If you're in Australia or somewhere like Vietnam or somewhere far away, we can make things 400% faster, because most of those guys are on 3G or HSPA, so legacy technologies. So one caveat on that is, back to Jason's slides today, is like, hey, the next billion people are out there. All of you guys that are app developers, you're probably pitching to your VCs like, we're going to go hit the next billion users. They're not in the US, right? They're in India, they're in Southeast Asia, they're in Africa. So you need to be, back to mobile first. One of the things I'd like to say is, if you're thinking mobile first, you got to think global first, honestly. Because those next billion users that are going to be your consumers and your customers are not sitting in this room. Well, some of them are, but they're out there. So one of the things that we've analyzed when we look through all these apps, which I can kind of deep dive into the technology, is that most app developers are hosted on EC2 or DigitalOcean or something like that, and they've only customized their app or configured their app to work here in San Francisco, New York, these locations, and they're not doing a very good job about globalizing.
So help me understand this a bit. I would have thought that if you have an engineering team at, say, a LinkedIn or a Facebook or a YouTube, perhaps, you've been dealing with handling heavy payloads across the desktop internet for a very long time, and in the 7 or 8 years that the iPhone has now been out, it would seem like you would have figured this out by now. It seemed like someone would have figured out the acceleration techniques and all the performance techniques to make the mobile apps run fast. So why is there still an opportunity here?
Terrific. Great question. So yes, if you are Facebook, and I'll just be forthright, if you're Facebook or if you're Google, you probably have the specialized engineers in-house to solve this problem. And actually, 2 of our advisory board members are Jay Parikh, who's the VP of engineering at Facebook, and Andy Berkheimer, who's the head of engineering at YouTube. They're on our advisory board. They have specialized guys that are like mobile experts, proxy, protocol, all of this stuff. Literally, Jay's 1,000 infrastructure engineers are working on solving this problem. So definitely those 2 organizations have talent in-house to be able to solve this problem. And it's never ending, because it's like so many variations of like 3G, but packet loss is happening on this, and this particular operator is not performing well, and it's an intensely challenging problem that really smart engineers will love working on for like a really long time. Outside of those 2 organizations, even if you're Yahoo or Twitter or LinkedIn, again, I know a lot of the...
You say the Yahoo engineers aren't good enough? Or is that what you're saying, Jeff?
I know the CDN teams over there. They're very smart, very hard-working engineers. They should probably be using someone that's really focused in on this problem, because a lot of their focus and their teams aren't really 100% dedicated to this. But
So I don't mean to poke fun at that. What I was make the observation is that, for example, when AdMob and Omar, who's the founder of AdMob, was speaking earlier, when AdMob was founded, nobody thought a startup could beat Google AdSense because Google was Google. But obviously, what played out is that AdMob was able to become a specialist and run fast and become differentiated enough that Google had to buy them. Similarly, a lot of that team spun out of AdMob to start MoPub, and that was ironically competing with AdMob Google, the organization they came out of. And again, because they were specialists in the space and they became best of breed at their layer, they ran fast and became valuable and got acquired by Twitter. And so I think that specialization story is what you're articulating.
absolutely. Yeah, we're 100% focusing on this. We don't do mobile web. We don't do browsers. We're laser focused on making apps faster in this ridiculously complex world of all this different Wi-Fi, 3G, WiMAX. There are WiMAX networks out there still, of course. LTE, every combination under the sun, and we somehow have to make this work. It's actually quite good for us in terms of recruiting, in terms of engineering talent. We go, do you really want to make ads faster, or do you want to solve this really technical, challenging problem? And some of the best just want to solve this crazy problem.
So give us a bit of insight on how if I'm a developer in the audience, I'm creating an app, what technique should I use to make my app scream if I don't want to use Neumob? Give us some tips for how you actually build a successful, fast-performing app, and then we'll give you 15 seconds at the end to talk about what Neumob does and how unique that is. But first, what do I do if I'm a developer and I want to make my app fast?
So again, analyzing the data that we have, we found a couple things. Everyone, and I'll talk about this after this, when we start talking about the shift in kind of infrastructure, all app developers are using a cloud solution. Okay, so remember the legacy BC? Well, when you set up a website, typically you went to like a Rackspace or Terramark or something to that effect, and you put them in an Equinix facility and you set up a website. That's no longer the case in mobile. Everyone is on mostly AWS, right? Some DigitalOcean, Linode, some cloud providers. It just makes sense because you don't know how big your app's going to be. It could be like some small little app, and then all of a sudden the next day it's like 1 billion users. So you put it on a cloud provider, and that's kind of what we're seeing. So all the app developer hands, I can pretty much guarantee you like 100% of those guys are on a cloud provider. You're on EC2, mostly Oregon. You should probably use West, don't use East. East is a little, whatever. Okay, back to the question. Technically, what we're finding is that 75% of the traffic that we've seen over our consumer app, you guys are still doing a terrible job on compression, honestly. gzip is like 25 years old, right? Please use gzip. 75% of all the apps that we're seeing right now are still not compressing your content. So simple things like, fine, images. Use PNG8. It's the most compressed format out there. I think this isn't new. You can go out there and see this kind of news. Use a very compressed image format, as well as your dynamic API calls, right? Your REST API calls going back and forth. Gzip them, okay? Because again, it may not matter very much when you're on a lightning fast 4G LTE here in San Francisco, but when you're sitting out there on a 3G network in Indonesia, it matters, okay? So gzip out to the mobile device, as well as gzip from the mobile device.
gzip is an open protocol, presumably for compression, that you have to implement both on the client side and the mobile app, and then back to the server in terms of handshaking with it.
Totally, because it takes down the packet size, the payload size, and it makes a huge difference for your mobile apps. So that right now, without a doubt, is my number one recommendation for you. The second thing is a bit technical, is manage your connection opens and your connection closes. What we're seeing out there, even really, I'm not going to call out the app, but I could, but the apps out there, you guys are doing a terrible job of opening and closing connections. Okay, again, back to what I said before, probably because you're factoring in for your local audience, San Francisco, New York, whatever. And so most of your audience are in this room are on 4G LTE. So opening a connection takes 40 milliseconds. It's oh, no big deal, and then you close it down. Let me tell you the relative thing, again, on a 3G networks coming in from India. It's 400 milliseconds to open up a connection. okay? So a lot of your app developers are doing really sloppy things about opening something up, getting a response, closing it down, and then opening up something again. So there's a lot of, again, best practices out there. Like if you're gonna do a bunch of connections, keep the connection alive, okay? So that you don't have to negotiate this open and close thing. Secondly, instead of having third-party API calls from your app going out to all these random places, if you can, centralize it. Have your server aggregated at your cloud layer first before it goes over the air to the client, okay? Just makes sense because again, your cloud infrastructure has a lot more bandwidth, has a lot more capabilities, and you send it over the air.
Okay, so let me play it back. So compress stuff that's big, manage your connections, and what was the third one?
That was it. Those
Okay,
are the two.
those
Those
two,
are the
okay.
top two that we see that are easy fixes that would save a lot of problems. And obviously, we implement those easy things as well as some of the harder things.
So what does Neumob do then? I mean, what does Neumob do incremental to those things, or how does it compare to those techniques? What is the space for a mobile app CDN or a mobile app accelerator, given those techniques?
Sure. So kind of like what Nihal said, our technology, our thing is pretty simple. We have an SDK, app developers bake it into your app. And all of a sudden, all of your wireless and Wi-Fi traffic starts getting proxied through our SDK. And for lack of a better, what it actually is a proxy cache sitting in your app. Okay, so think if you guys are familiar with CDNs or whatnot, what they basically did was put a bunch of servers all around the globe. What we're basically doing is making your app a node on our global network. Okay, so then all of your Wi-Fi traffic wireless traffic starts going into our proxy, sitting in your app, and then gets relayed out to our cloud network. Along the way, we translate what you're doing, what you're doing from standard TCP/IP into our proprietary protocol called, for lack of a better marketing term, Neumob protocol. It's a UDP variant that just makes things lightning fast. And so we strip out all the back and forth that happens with negotiations. We keep sessions alive, and we just slam data up to our cloud network. And then the cloud network, again, relays it back to wherever you're origined. That's, again, AWS. And we make the entire transaction something like, again, 40 to 400% faster. That's kind of what we do.
So back in the old days, I used to build mail systems, and we would build these largely crappy, in my case of the things I built, mail systems for all the big carriers like Bell South or Comcast or Cox. And we saw the early days of first Rocket Mail, and then Yahoo Mail, and then eventually what I use, and probably most of you use today, Gmail, in terms of a really, really fast performing mail service. And if you don't think, improved snappiness and speed and responsiveness, it can have a dramatic impact in terms of which apps get adopted or not. And I think the email wars of the previous 5 years are a really, really, really good example of that. So maybe stop and take maybe questions from the audience. I have one more question for Jeff, but if you have a question for Jeff or for myself, I'm happy to take them. Why don't we go to this gentleman here, and then I'll come back and ask my question. Yes, you.
Sorry, a question for you. You mentioned about targeting Asia and outside of the US. So we've been trying to explore this for the last few months, but we often get a lot of pushback from US VCs saying nothing outside of America really matters because monetization hasn't been proven. The Indian user, whilst there may be 400 million that are going to be coming on, don't really churn that much revenue. So why are you wasting your time? Just focus on San Francisco first. And our view has always been, we've already churned that channel, so why would we focus here? But you get this dichotomy when you're trying to plan towards your funding as well. So more for you, Rich.
Okay, so the question is basically, why are VCs dumb? I think is basically the implicit question. Why do VCs not value user bases outside of North America generally? So I would say, I think that might be true of people that don't really get mobile, if I may say. I mean, to credit to Sequoia, obviously the largest mobile exits, WhatsApp, which is very much outside of North America. We're investors in Flipkart at the Series A stage, where the largest, as you know, commerce company in South Asia, the Amazon of that region, you cannot buy a product that's not on a mobile app. And so I think, folks that are really, really interested in seeing mobile succeed, and it is essentially a global footprint. I do think that if you are ad supported, The eCPMs are crummy outside of North America and Western Europe. So if you're ad supported, it's a little bit harder, I think, to get to scale. But I think there's a lot of VCs that are very interested in the user bases outside of North America, as the two examples I gave, at least. Questions?
I'd like to answer that question as well, because I actually heard the exact same thing when I was fundraising. I ran out of that place as fast as I could when I heard like a comment like that from a VC.
Other questions? So I have a question. While if anybody else would like to ask one, but I want to ask one to Jeff first, which is, I know you don't want to name names of apps that aren't performing well, but I'm going to ask you to name names. Who, give me an example. You could pick one that's, you don't have to insult too many folks, but give me an example of of apps that have areas for substantial improvement, if you can.
Okay. Well, first off, download the consumer app, and you'll see for yourself. So I'll name a big brand just because I respect the engineering team there, but still, there's room for improvement, and that's Twitter. Okay. So Twitter's obviously, all you guys are on Twitter right now. You pull the thing down, and a little thing scrolls. Right now, our data shows that we can improve Twitter's performance in in 8 parts of Asia, where there's a huge, obviously, consumer base, by like 440%. Okay, and that's Twitter. Twitter has great engineers, but they're just not focused on this because they're focused on making great UI and UX. That's their specialty.
And so I think that I have a lot of friends at Twitter as well, and I think it's an excellent engineering team. I think the reality of that is increasingly the south of market and New York, Manhattan entrepreneur that comes up with a lot of the different mobile apps that we use today are largely front-end engineers historically. I know there's many exceptions. I'm sure someone will shout me down in about 15 seconds when I'm done talking, but the majority of them are just not experts in content delivery and web performance, and they're not experts at the lower layers of the stack. And they've actually built very large successes off of what I call the API economy, where they're including a composite of other third-party services to create a great application. But that means that they tend not to be performance experts, and why I think you have, even with medium to larger companies, this gap of opportunity. Any other questions? Okay.
Sorry, another question on global. When you look at language support, outside of, say, Hindi if you're in India, or Mandarin if you're in China, what are the other languages that you're seeing outside of North America that are really important to have in place for app launch?
That's a question for me?
Yes.
Honestly, you can. I don't have the facts right off the top of my head, but you can go see all the market reports. Obviously, for us personally, for our consumer app, and again, that's not enough data, right? We're huge in like Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, Brazil, all of these locations, because again, you're talking 400, 500% faster. So the consumers are like spreading it to their friends, like, your Twitter will work faster if you download this. That's just our anecdotal data point. I think the market reports are correct and everything else. And let me give you one more comment on this. One of my employees, she just came from SoftBank Capital. Okay, and this is for the VC folks as well. I think this is public news. I think it's out there. SoftBank Capital has decided that why battle it out with the folks like Accel here in the U.S. for like single-digit or double-digit gains, when they can invest in places like India and Southeast Asia and get triple-digit gains. So they pretty much at a strategic level, they've dumped the U.S. and gone out to these larger areas. I bring that up because it's kind of like for us in the mobile app ecosystem, again, mobile first, global first. We got to go start looking at the bigger picture.
Yes, sir.
Sure. So he said difference between hybrid apps and native apps, difference in performance and latencies of that nature. Absolutely. again, back to Jason's presentation this morning. If you want a highly functional, like where latency is important, you got to go native, okay? Because anything that's cacheable, anything that's heavy, people are going to build into their native apps anyway, and then all you're left with is basically API calls, right? So anything that's like the typical customer that loves us right now is like trading platforms or like gambling or massively multiplayer games. Anything that's content rich is already there. Whereas in a hybrid app, because it's based on WebKit, you're still having to like download all the images and do all this. So the answer to yours is, if you're looking for high, fast stuff, native.
For what it's worth, I mean, 8-9 years ago in the early days of, as Omar from AdMob was talking, this was right when the iPhone was launched. One of the fundamental worries we had is that the real mobile commerce economy would never really emerge. Like the only thing you could really buy back then was ringtones, wallpapers, and oddly mobile dating were like the three things that you could actually purchase, and it was very difficult to do it because you're on a T9, 9-key device trying to tap in credit card numbers and other forms of information. And so what's really exciting, of course, that's happened in the last 8 or 9 years is there's essentially all forms of mobile commerce now on the device. So you have everything from food delivery to shopping, but inherently the payloads have gotten much, much heavier as you've moved from sort of those simple pieces of content to entire catalogs of images, of goods and services and products to buy. And so I think in the same way that peer-to-peer traffic, things like Napster and BitTorrent created all this load on the desktop network when you go back 10 years, I think that rise of mobile commerce is what's creating this crazy load on the mobile network, and why there's now an opportunity for companies like Neumob that there weren't just a couple of years ago. Okay. So the question is, is the world going to stay native only, or with the advancement of tools like PhoneGap, is it going to become easier to build hybrid tools? Jeff?
So, just one man's opinion on this one. Our consumer app actually is hybrid, to tell you the truth, and that it's off base Cordova, it's off of the Ionic framework. Okay, and the primary reason we went off that way was because it was quick to build. We had full stack engineers that knew JavaScript, and super simple, and we just got it out to market. But now that we're out and we have funding, thank you, Rich, and we can hire more engineers, we're going native. And I think that's very common. Like, you get out there with hybrid because it's so easy to get out there, but eventually when you really want to focus on performance, you got to cut over native. But that's just my opinion.
It's a cliche, but you prototype in hybrid and you optimize long-term on native is the way we advise our companies, for better or worse.